One daughter saves lives. The other can barely keep a job. Those were the exact words my mother, Orla, chose to project across the grand ballroom. She stood at the head of the VIP table, her posture rigid with self-importance, tapping a heavy silver spoon against her crystal champagne flute. The sharp, piercing sound demanded the absolute attention of the 14 people seated around us. The room itself was a masterclass in aggressive wealth. It was dripping in cascading white roses and orchids, bathed in the soft, expensive glow of imported crystal chandeliers. The air smelled of roasted duck, expensive perfume, and the overwhelming scent of financial superiority. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was looking at Delphine, my older sister, sitting there in her custom-made Italian silk gown, practically glowing with the sheer perfection of her carefully curated life. And then, as if on cue, everyone's eyes shifted to look at me. My mother laughed. It was a bright, airy, musical sound, deliberately designed to sound like a harmless joke among loved ones. The laughter trickled down the long, flower-strewn table. Declan, the groom, chuckled politely, swirling his vintage red wine in his glass. Uncle Soren practically barked with amusement, nudging the wealthy aunt sitting next to him as if my entire existence was the punchline to a brilliant comedy routine. I sat there in my cheap, poorly fitted beige bridesmaid dress, staring blankly at my pristine porcelain plate. I did not cry. I did not flinch. I did not even blink. I just felt a cold, deep, familiar hollow carve itself into the center of my chest. This was it. This was the exact moment she chose to twist the knife, doing it in front of Declan's astronomically wealthy family, in front of the society people she wanted to impress more than she wanted to breathe. She wanted every single person in that room to know that while Delphine was the surgeon, the golden child, the literal savior of human lives, I was just the stray dog they had generously allowed inside for the evening out of pure Christian charity. But as the laughter slowly died down and my mother proudly raised her glass to praise my sister's flawless success once again, the heavy, intricately carved oak doors at the front of the reception hall swung open with a resounding thud. A man in a sharp, impeccably tailored charcoal suit stepped into the room. He did not look like a wedding guest. He did not carry a neatly wrapped gift. He carried a battered leather briefcase, and his eyes scanned the sprawling room with a chilling, predatory intensity before locking directly onto our VIP table. It was Alaric, the chief executive officer of the very hospital where Delphine supposedly worked. The comfortable chatter died instantly. The silence that swept through the room was thick, heavy, and suffocating. And when Alaric stopped directly in front of my mother, completely ignoring her confused, flattering, and desperate smile, he delivered a sentence that would reduce her entire universe to rubble. But I am getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you exactly how those polished, arrogant smiles vanished from their faces, before I describe the exact shade of paper white my sister's face turned when her empire of lies collapsed into dust, you need to deeply understand the foundation she built it on. You need to know how I became the designated loser in a family utterly obsessed with winning, and why I let them believe their own delusions for so many years. I am Sloane. I am 35 years old. To my mother, I am a freelance consultant who jumps blindly from one vague gig to another, a pathetic woman who drives a scratched, 10-year-old sedan and lives in a constant, humiliating state of financial instability. To her, my lack of a crisp white medical coat, my lack of a corner office in a glass tower, and my refusal to brag meant my life was a chaotic, shameful mess that she constantly had to apologize for. She loved telling her country club friends that she was praying for me to find my path. The truth, however, was entirely different. I run a highly aggressive private equity firm specializing in acquiring, restructuring, and liquidating bankrupt medical facilities across the coast. I deal in numbers, contracts, and acquisitions that would make my mother physically dizzy. I am a self-made millionaire several times over. But I learned very early in life that sharing my successes with my family was exactly like throwing raw, bloody meat to a pack of starving wolves. They would never celebrate it. They would tear it apart, find a twisted way to minimize it, pick at the flaws, and ultimately use it to elevate Delphine. Delphine was 39, a supposedly brilliant surgeon, and my mother's ultimate, shining trophy. From the time we were children in pigtails, the roles were set in stone and reinforced daily. Delphine was the blazing sun, and I was just a cold, ugly rock floating in the dark, lucky to catch any stray warmth she decided to throw my way. If I got a perfect grade on a difficult math test, Delphine had just won a state science fair, making my little grade completely irrelevant. If I learned to ride a bike, Delphine was already mastering competitive horseback riding. There was never a single moment in my childhood where I was allowed to simply exist and be proud of myself without being immediately crushed under the weight of her shadow. Sitting at that extravagant wedding table, listening to my mother call me a jobless failure to a room full of millionaires, the anger did not rise like a hot fire. It settled into my bones like absolute ice. For years, I had swallowed my pride. I had smiled through the relentless family drama, the humiliation, and the casual mockery, hoping that maybe, just maybe, if I stayed small enough, my mother would eventually look at me with something resembling genuine maternal love. Instead, my long silence only taught her that I was a completely safe target. I realized then that my presence at this wedding was only required so Delphine had a dull, pathetic background to shine brightly against. I looked at my mother's beaming, Botox-smoothed face as she toasted the daughter she believed was utterly flawless. I looked at Delphine, wearing an enormous diamond heirloom necklace that held a dark, dirty secret only she and I knew about. The sheer injustice of it all tasted like bitter ash in my mouth. How could a mother look at her own flesh and blood and feel absolutely nothing but contempt? How could a sister be so comfortable stepping on my neck to reach her pedestal? The answer is simple. Because I let them. Because I handed them the knife. But what happens when the punching bag finally decides to hit back? How do you think my mother will react when she realizes the absolute loser she just mocked in front of 14 people is the only thing standing between her precious golden child and a federal prison sentence? To truly comprehend the sheer, breathtaking cruelty of my mother's wedding toast, you have to take a walk through the museum of my past. My memory is an endless, echoing gallery of slights, dismissals, and blatant betrayals. The exhibits in this museum are not physical objects, but moments perfectly frozen in time, each one a testament to the undeniable fact that I was never, and would never be, enough for them. The very first exhibit is my college graduation. It was a miserable, freezing, rainy Tuesday in late May. I was 22 years old, standing in the muddy, ruined grass of the university campus quad, clutching a soaked faux leather folder containing my hard-earned business degree. I had worked 3 grueling jobs to pay my tuition. I wiped tables at a diner, filed papers at a law firm, and tutored freshmen, sleeping barely 4 hours a night. I dragged myself through every single exam with the singular, pathetic hope that when I finally walked across that grand stage, my mother would be in the audience, smiling, clapping. Just for me. Just for one day. I stood in the freezing rain for 2 solid hours after the ceremony officially ended. The campus slowly, painfully emptied out around me. Happy families hugged, took hundreds of photos under colorful umbrellas, and drove away to warm, celebratory dinners. I stood shivering under the concrete awning of the campus library, calling my mother's phone over and over. It went straight to voicemail. Again and again. Finally, my phone buzzed with a short, dismissive text message. Sorry, Sloan. Delphine's transmission blew on her way to the clinic. Had to drive her to the luxury dealership to co-sign a lease on a brand new SUV. She desperately needs a reliable car for her prestigious residency. We will celebrate your thing later. Your thing. A 4-year university degree, earned with my own literal blood, sweat, and tears, was just your thing. Delphine's minor convenience, however, was a catastrophic emergency requiring immediate, dropping everything parental intervention. I remember standing there, my hands numb from the cold. I slowly took the cheap, plastic graduation tassel off my cap, shoved it deep into my wet pocket, and walked 3 miles back to my cramped, moldy apartment in the pouring rain. We never did celebrate my thing. The new luxury SUV, however, was shown off to every single aunt, uncle, and jealous neighbor for weeks on end. The second exhibit in my Museum of Pain is the warehouse. A few years after that miserable graduation, I started my first real, independent business venture. It was not private equity yet. I was building the capital for that. It was a scrappy, aggressive logistics consulting firm. I rented a tiny, miserable office space inside a converted, drafty industrial warehouse on the bad side of town. It smelled faintly of mildew, old cardboard, and roasted coffee beans from the cheap cafe next door. The floor was stained concrete, the desk was bought from a dirty thrift store, and the heating unit barely worked. But it was entirely mine. I was building a massive empire from absolute zero. I made the fatal mistake of inviting my mother to see it. I thought, incredibly naively, that seeing me sitting in my own office, running my own registered business, would finally earn me a tiny nod of approval. She walked in wearing her pristine designer winter coat, her nose instantly wrinkling in absolute disgust. She refused to sit on the second-hand office chairs. She stared at my massive whiteboard, which was covered in complex financial projections and million-dollar client leads, and she sighed a heavy, tragic, theatrical sigh. She turned to me, her eyes filled with a sickening mix of pity and embarrassment, and said, "Sloane, honestly, how long are you going to play pretend? This place is incredibly depressing. You are a relatively smart girl. You could easily get a decent job as a waitress at that nice country club downtown while you figure out a real, respectable career. Delphine just bought her first beautiful house, you know. She does not have to work in a damp, disgusting basement like a rat." I desperately tried to explain that this was a startup, that the revenue projections were incredibly solid, that I had just secured my first major corporate contract. She just waved her manicured hand in the air, dismissing my frantic words as if they were annoying gnats. It was just a little hobby to her. A pathetic, messy, embarrassing hobby. I stopped trying to explain myself after that awful day. I let her believe I had failed. I let her believe I was jumping from one dead-end gig to another. It was 1,000 times easier than watching her tear down everything I had broken my back to build. The final exhibit is my grandmother Marigold. She was the absolute only person in that entire toxic family who actually saw me. She used to sit with me on her creaky wooden porch, holding my small hand in her fragile one, telling me I had a fierce fire in my soul that the rest of them completely lacked. When she passed away, the reading of the will was a masterclass in favoritism. She left her beautiful, incredibly valuable vintage pearl necklace to Delphine. To me, she left her handwritten diaries and a small, tarnished, antique silver locket. Delphine paraded those pearls around at every single family event, a glowing symbol that she was the chosen one, even in death. But I read the diaries. Marigold wrote extensively about how much she constantly worried for me, how she saw Orla ruthlessly crushing my spirit every day, and how she desperately hoped I would one day fly far away from their toxic, poisonous orbit. The locket was not just a cheap piece of jewelry. It was a physical reminder that someone in this world had loved me for exactly who I was, not for what prestigious title I could achieve on a piece of paper. These agonizing memories are the solid rock foundation of my extreme tolerance. They taught me to build an impenetrable fortress around my true life. When my private equity firm violently took off, when I bought my first multi-million-dollar luxury penthouse in the city, when my bank account swelled to staggering 7 figures, I kept every single bit of it hidden in the dark. I wore plain, unbranded clothes to family dinners. I intentionally drove an old, beat-up car. I let them pay for my cheap meals, forcing myself to endure their smug smiles and unsolicited, insulting financial advice. I became a ghost in my own family, quietly watching them perform their arrogant lives. I thought I was protecting my peace. I thought that by hiding my massive success, I was denying them the chance to ruin it. But sitting at that wedding, listening to the echoing cruelty of my mother's laughter, I finally realized my silence had not protected me at all. It had only given them a blank check to rewrite my reality and treat me like trash. How much longer was I supposed to play the pathetic fool for their endless entertainment? How many more insults could a daughter swallow before she finally decides to burn the house down? The absolute cruelty of this wedding did not just spontaneously start at the reception. It started exactly 1 month prior, with a phone call that perfectly set the stage for the entire looming disaster. I was sitting in my sleek, modern home office overlooking the city's skyline, reviewing a highly confidential, multi-million-dollar hospital acquisition portfolio, when Delphine's name flashed aggressively on my screen. I rarely spoke to her outside of mandatory, excruciating family gatherings, so I answered with a heavy sense of dread settling in my stomach. She did not bother with simple pleasantries. "Sloan, I need a massive favor right now. Declan's mother is throwing an absolute fit about the wedding favors and the floral centerpieces. She thinks the standard ones the venue provides look incredibly cheap and tacky. I want custom, artisanal gift baskets for the VIP guests and massive, cascading floral arrangements for all 20 tables." I blinked, staring blankly at my computer screen. "Okay," I said slowly, trying to process the demand. "Do you want me to recommend a high-end vendor? I know a few good ones in the city." "No," Delphine sighed loudly, the sound incredibly heavy with deep impatience and condescension. "I want you to do it. You are always doing those little craft projects and freelance things. You have so much free time sitting around doing nothing. It will be a really nice way for you to actually contribute since, you absolutely cannot afford a real wedding gift for us." I gripped the edge of my mahogany desk tight enough to make my knuckles turn completely white and ache. She was casually asking me to manually design, individually source, and personally assemble 20 massive, complicated floral arrangements and dozens of luxury gift baskets. I ran a very quick mental calculation in my head. The raw materials alone, the imported orchids, the silk ribbons, the artisanal chocolates, would easily cost upwards of $20,000. Not to mention the dozens of hours of back-breaking manual labor. "Delphine, that is a massive undertaking," I said, trying to keep my voice perfectly level. "The flowers alone will cost." Before I could even finish my sentence, I heard a second, booming voice on the line. It was our Uncle Soren. He must have been over at her apartment. "Come on, Sloan." Soren yelled obnoxiously in the background. "Your sister is marrying into an incredibly prominent family. She is a highly respected surgeon. The absolute least you can do is help her out. It is not like you have a demanding, real career keeping you busy. It will give you a sense of purpose for once in your life." My vision literally blurred with a sudden, intense, terrifying spike of rage. A sense of purpose. As if my entire existence on this earth was a meaningless, empty void until the great Delphine graciously offered me the chance to serve her on my hands and knees. I wanted to scream into the phone. I wanted to tell them that my hourly consulting rate alone would completely bankrupt them. I wanted to ask how a supposedly wealthy, successful surgeon could not afford her own damn wedding flowers. "I will think about it," I managed to say, my throat completely tight. "Do not think about it. Just do it," Delphine snapped back, her tone sharp and dictatorial. "Mom said you would do it. She already told Declan's family you were handling all of it. Do not embarrass us, Sloan. Just get it done." She hung up. The line went dead. I sat in the complete silence of my luxurious office, the dial tone ringing in my ear like a physical slap to the face. They had already promised my intense physical labor and my money to complete strangers without my consent. They fully expected me to drain my own savings, which they firmly believed were pathetic and meager, to fund her perfect aesthetic. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement was breathtaking. I was expected to gladly bleed myself dry so Delphine could shine just a little bit brighter. And the most pathetic, horrifying part? I was actually considering doing it. The psychological conditioning ran so deep in my veins that my very first instinct was to open a new tab and figure out how to source wholesale orchids without letting them know I had the money to buy the best. I was genuinely willing to let them treat me like an unpaid servant just to keep the fragile peace in the family. But then, the universe finally intervened. My phone buzzed again on the desk. This time, it was a text message from Veda. Veda was our younger cousin, the quiet, observant one who worked as a senior data analyst at a major regional bank downtown. She never, ever got involved in the family drama. She just observed, sitting silently in the corners of living rooms during holidays, sipping her tea and watching the chaos unfold. The message was incredibly brief. Are you free for coffee? Right now. It is urgent. There was something about the stark, serious tone of that text that made my stomach completely drop. Veda did not do urgent. Veda did not do spontaneous. I immediately closed my laptop, grabbed my coat, and drove my old sedan to a small, nondescript cafe on the very edge of town, far away from anyone we knew. When I arrived, Veda was already sitting in a dark back booth, a thick manila envelope resting ominously on the table in front of her. She looked terrified. Her hands were wrapped so tightly around her ceramic mug that her fingers were white, and she kept glancing nervously at the door. I slid into the vinyl booth across from her. What is going on? I asked, keeping my voice low. Veda took a deep, shaky breath. You know I work in the high-risk assessment department at the bank, right? I am strictly not supposed to look at family accounts. It is a massive violation. But a file crossed my desk yesterday. An automated anomaly report. And Sloan, I had to look. I could not ignore it. She slowly pushed the heavy envelope across the table toward me. I stared at it, a cold, creeping dread washing over every inch of my body. Open it, she whispered. I reached out with trembling fingers and flipped the flap. Inside were several pages of printed spreadsheets, densely packed with numbers and highlighted in bright, glaring yellow. They were detailed bank statements. My mother's personal bank statements. And right below them, statements belonging to Delphine. I do not understand, I said, my eyes scanning the endless rows of numbers. What exactly am I looking at here? Look at the recurring transfers, Veda said, pointing a shaking finger at a specific column on the first page. I traced my finger down the paper. Every single month, on the second day of the month, a deposit was made into my mother's account. $5,000. I instantly recognized that transfer. It was the money I secretly sent my mother every single month. I had been sending it for 3 years, ever since her retirement, to ensure she lived comfortably. She always thanked me with a tight, condescending smile, telling me it barely covered her basic groceries, but she supposed she appreciated the gesture. Now, look at the very next column, Veda said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I looked. On the third day of every month, exactly 24 hours after my hard-earned money hit my mother's account, a transfer went out. The exact same amount. $5,000. The recipient account belonged to Delphine. My breath caught sharply in my throat. I read the lines over and over and over, desperately trying to make the numbers mean something else. But the brutal truth was written in stark black and white. For 3 whole years, my mother had been taking the money I quietly, lovingly gave her, the money I worked relentlessly to earn, and handing it directly to my sister. The sister who constantly bragged about her massive surgeon salary. The sister who looked down on me like I was dirt. I was secretly funding the golden child's luxury lifestyle. What else is hiding in this envelope, Veda? What are they really doing? The industrial espresso machine in the cafe hissed violently, a sharp burst of steam that snapped me back to the cold, harsh reality. I sat completely frozen in the worn leather booth, staring at the numbers on the spreadsheet until they blurred into meaningless, jagged black shapes. $5,000 a month. $60,000 a year. $180,000 over 3 years. Stolen. Laundered through my mother's blinding affection for her golden child. I felt a profound, chilling numbness spread from the center of my chest all the way out to my fingertips. I had spent my entire adult life desperately trying to be a good, supportive daughter from the shadows. I endured their endless mockery, their pathetic pity, their relentless jokes about my supposed poverty. I swallowed my pride, drove a terrible car, and wore cheap clothes to family dinners specifically so I would not trigger my mother's deep insecurities and defensive wrath. And every single month, I faithfully sent $5,000 to ensure the woman who constantly belittled me never had to worry about a medical bill or a broken furnace. And she gave every single red cent to Delphine. She did not just give it to Delphine. She took my hard-earned money, handed it to the exact sister who mocked my very existence, and then both of them continued to treat me like a worthless, lazy charity case. They literally spent my money while loudly telling the world I was a massive failure. What did she do? I asked, my voice sounding incredibly hollow, like it was echoing from the bottom of a deep well. How does a supposedly genius surgeon need a $5,000 allowance from her mother? Veda leaned in much closer, her eyes darting around the small cafe to make absolutely sure no one was listening to us. It is bad, Sloan. Really, really bad. You know she was the head of the surgical wing at Vanguard Medical? Well, she was not just performing complex surgeries. She was officially managing the vendor contracts for all their high-end medical supplies. She was skimming, approving massively inflated invoices for surgical equipment and quietly funneling the massive excess cash into a fake shell company she set up. She was using it to fund her entire lifestyle. The luxury cars, the designer clothes, the European vacations. My stomach violently churned. Embezzlement. Corporate fraud. The brilliant, flawless, untouchable Delphine was nothing but a common, greedy thief. The hospital caught on during a routine internal audit about 6 months ago, Veda continued, her words tumbling out quickly. They immediately stripped her of her medical license temporarily, pending a full federal investigation. They fired her very quietly to avoid a massive public relations scandal. But they demanded the money back. $850,000 to be exact. That is the restitution amount. If she does not pay it back in full, they will officially press criminal charges and send her to prison. Your mother found out and absolutely panicked. She took out a massive second mortgage on the family home to cover the first giant installment of the settlement. That is exactly where your $5,000 a month is going. It is paying the crippling interest on the mortgage that is keeping Delphine out of a jail cell. I leaned heavily back against the vinyl seat, the breath completely knocked out of me. The sheer, unadulterated audacity was almost magnificent in its evilness. My mother was intentionally risking her own home, her own retirement, her entire future to protect Delphine from the severe legal consequences of her own criminal actions. And she was using my money to do it, all while looking me in the eye and telling me I needed to get a real job. And Declan? I asked, my mind racing to the innocent groom. Does he have any idea who he is marrying? Veda shook her head slowly, looking incredibly sad. No. From what I can tell from the accounts, Declan firmly believes she took a voluntary sabbatical to plan their perfect wedding. His family is wealthy, Sloan. Old, established, generational money. If they find out she is an unemployed fraud facing potential felony criminal charges, they will cancel the wedding immediately. Delphine is banking her entire life on this marriage. Once she is legally tied to Declan, his family's immense wealth becomes her permanent safety net. She is marrying him strictly for a financial bailout. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the small table. The sheer scale of the manipulation and deceit was staggering. I looked down at the highlighted spreadsheet again. I thought about the phone call I received just hours earlier. Delphine aggressively demanding $20,000 worth of custom flowers. Uncle Soren loudly telling me I needed a sense of purpose. They were not just cruel. They were absolutely desperate. They were standing on the burning deck of a rapidly sinking ship, aggressively demanding that I serve them vintage champagne while they secretly stole my lifeboats to save themselves. I am so sorry, Sloan, Veda whispered, thick tears finally pooling in her eyes. I knew they were awful to you, I knew they favored her, but I never in a million years imagined it was this dark and twisted. You have to stop sending the money immediately. You have to tell Declan before he ruins his life. I looked at Veda, the timid, quiet cousin who had risked her own corporate job and her own safety to bring me the brutal truth. A strange, terrifying, absolute calm washed over me. The burning anger that had been simmering inside me for 3 decades did not boil over. It crystallized. It turned into something cold, hard, and incredibly sharp. No, I said softly, carefully gathering the papers and sliding them back into the thick envelope. Veda looked completely confused. No? Sloan, they are actively stealing from you. They are committing fraud. I will stop the bank transfers, eventually, I said, carefully sealing the envelope shut. But I am not going to tell Declan. I am not going to say a single word to anyone. Veda stared at me, absolutely horrified. Why? Are you seriously going to let her get away with this? I picked up my leather purse and looked my cousin dead in the eye, my face devoid of any emotion. Veda, for 35 long years, they have told me exactly who I am. They wrote a detailed script where Delphine is the glorious hero and I am the pathetic, useless loser dragging them all down. I am not going to ruin her wedding by being the jealous, crazy sister who throws wild accusations around before the ceremony. They would just deny it, and my mother would brilliantly twist it to make me look insane. Then what on earth are you going to do? I smiled, and I felt absolutely nothing but ice water in my veins. I am going to let them play their parts to perfection. I am going to show up to the rehearsal, I am going to play the loser they desperately need me to be, and I am going to let Delphine build her fragile glass castle as high as she possibly wants. Because the higher a castle is built on lies, the harder it shatters when the truth finally hits the floor. I thanked Veda, paid for both of our coffees in cash, and walked out of the cafe. The crisp afternoon air hit my face, but I barely felt it. My mind was already racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour, analyzing the variables, connecting the dots. I was no longer just the emotional scapegoat of a toxic family. I was a ruthless private equity CEO looking at a fundamentally corrupt, failing asset. And it was time for a hostile takeover. I got into my car, pulled out my phone, and made a direct call to my wealth manager. I canceled the recurring $5,000 transfer to my mother's account, effective immediately. Then I pulled up a different contact. A contact that would turn this pathetic family drama into a brutal corporate execution. If they wanted a loser, I would give them one. But they were about to learn a very hard lesson. The rehearsal dinner was held the night before the wedding, located in a highly exclusive, private dining room of a ridiculously expensive Italian restaurant downtown. The air in the room smelled heavily of roasted garlic, $300 bottles of red wine, and the suffocating, heavy perfume of desperate people pretending everything was absolutely perfect. I arrived exactly on time, wearing a simple, dark blue dress. It was not a designer label, it did not sparkle, but it was neat and appropriate. I walked in carrying a small, beautifully wrapped gift bag for the couple. As soon as I crossed the threshold of the private room, the atmosphere noticeably shifted. My mother, Orla, stood near the private bar, holding a large glass of expensive Pinot Noir. When she saw me walk in, her eyes instantly scanned my outfit from top to bottom, desperately searching for a flaw, a loose thread, anything she could use to critique me. Sloane, she sighed loudly, walking over with a look of intense disappointment. You really could not find something a little more festive for your sister's rehearsal? You look like you are attending a boring corporate seminar, not the most important night of Delphine's life. Declan's parents are wearing custom silk, for heaven's sake. I am comfortable, Mom, I said evenly, holding my ground and keeping my expression completely neutral. She rolled her eyes dramatically and turned away, entirely dismissing my presence. I walked over to the long, beautifully decorated main table and took my assigned seat. Of course, it was placed at the very far end, as far away from the immediate family as physically possible, awkwardly sandwiched between Declan's distant, elderly cousins who clearly had no interest in speaking to me. Delphine held court at the exact center of the room. She was wearing a stunning, form-fitting white cocktail dress, laughing loudly and brightly at a joke Declan had just made. And there, resting prominently against her collarbone, was the heirloom. My breath hitched in my throat. It was a spectacular, breathtaking diamond necklace, set in heavy platinum, an antique piece that had belonged to our great-grandmother. My mother had officially, publicly gifted it to Delphine a week ago, claiming it was her something old for the wedding. Delphine touched it constantly throughout the dinner, purposefully drawing attention to it, graciously accepting lavish compliments from Declan's incredibly wealthy aunts with practiced, fake humility. Oh, it is just a small family heirloom, Delphine demurred sweetly as a woman draped in real diamonds gasped at it. We cherish our family history above all else. I sat quietly in my corner, staring at the necklace, a bitter, almost hysterical laugh threatening to claw its way up my throat. It was breathtaking. It was dazzling. And it was utterly, undeniably, 100% fake. I knew it was fake because the real one was currently locked safely inside a heavy steel safe in the master bedroom of my penthouse. 2 years ago, during a lavish family vacation that Delphine insisted on, she had secretly pawned the real diamond necklace to desperately cover a massive, secret credit card bill she was hiding from our mother. She quietly replaced it with a high-quality, custom-made cubic zirconia replica. She thought she was an absolute genius. But the pawnshop owner was an old, loyal client of my logistics firm. He immediately recognized the distinct, antique piece from a family photo I had on my desk once. He called me in a panic. I quietly paid $12,000 in pure cash to buy it back, saving our family's legacy from being sold off to strangers. I kept the real necklace, patiently waiting for the day Delphine would break down and confess her crime. She never did. She let our mother believe the fake glass was the real thing, and now she was wearing a cheap piece of junk to impress a family of literal billionaires. I sat there, silently sipping my ice water, watching the grand delusion unfold before my eyes. Halfway through the decadent 5-course dinner, the speeches finally began. Uncle Soren stood up, aggressively raising his wine glass. He was flushed red, his tie completely loosened, clearly enjoying the free, top-shelf alcohol far too much. To Delphine, he boomed, his voice echoing off the walls. The absolute pride of our family. A brilliant doctor, a stunningly beautiful bride, and a woman who truly knows what it takes to succeed in this harsh world. He paused dramatically, looking directly down the long length of the table, locking eyes with me. He grinned, a nasty, sharp, cruel thing. And let us all pray that some of that incredible ambition finally rubs off on her little sister. Maybe catching the bridal bouquet tomorrow will give Sloane the motivation to finally find a steady job and move out of her slump. The entire room erupted in loud laughter. Declan's family chuckled awkwardly, unsure if it was an inside joke but going along with it. My mother laughed the absolute loudest, clapping her hands together in delight. Delphine smiled at me, a serene, condescending look of pure pity masking her beautiful face. I did not react. I did not blush. I did not look down. I just looked directly at Uncle Soren, my face a completely blank, unreadable slate. The total lack of an emotional reaction seemed to deeply irritate my mother. She stood up abruptly, holding her full glass of red wine, and walked purposefully toward my end of the table. "Oh, do not be so incredibly sensitive, Sloane," she said loudly, her words slightly slurred from the wine. "Soren is just teasing you. We all know you are trying your best with your little freelance projects. It is not your fault you lack your sister's drive." She reached out with her hand to pat my shoulder in a mock display of comfort. As she did, she intentionally stumbled forward. Her wrist violently flicked, and a heavy, splashing wave of dark, expensive red wine sloshed over the rim of her crystal glass, landing directly onto the front of my light blue dress. A collective, horrified gasp echoed through the quiet room. The cold, sticky liquid rapidly seeped through the fabric, sticking uncomfortably to my skin, blooming into a massive, undeniable dark stain. I sat completely frozen. "Oh my goodness." My mother gasped, though her eyes held a frantic, defensive, almost victorious gleam. "Well, you shouldn't have moved so suddenly. Look what you made me do. Go to the bathroom immediately and clean it up. Honestly, Sloane, you always find a way to make a ridiculous scene when the attention isn't on you." She blamed me. She intentionally poured a glass of wine on me in front of 30 people, and she instantly blamed me for ruining the moment. Declan looked absolutely horrified. "Mrs. Parker, I don't think she moved," he started to say, but Delphine quickly reached out and touched his arm, shaking her head sadly as if to say, "Leave it, she is just unstable." I stood up very slowly. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I looked down at the dark, ruined stain across my chest. Then I looked directly into my mother's eyes. "Excuse me," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I turned on my heel, walked out of the silent dining room, and stepped into the quiet, brightly lit, marble-tiled bathroom. I firmly locked the heavy wooden door behind me. I turned on the gold-plated sink, soaking a thick paper towel in freezing cold water, and began aggressively dabbing at the stain. The water turned a sickly pink, but the dark red blotch remained permanently set in the fabric, a physical mark of my eternal humiliation. I looked up at myself in the large, ornate mirror. My eyes were dark, completely devoid of the tears I used to cry when I was younger. The scared, desperate little girl who just wanted her mother to love her was entirely gone. The loyal sister who secretly bought back a pawn necklace to save her family from embarrassment was dead. They had stolen my money to save themselves from prison, and in return, they poured wine on me and publicly called me a failure. They were comfortable in their cruelty because they firmly believed I had absolutely no power to fight back. I dropped the wet, pink paper towel into the trash can. I pulled my phone from my small clutch. I opened my contacts and stared at a specific name. It was finally time to pull the pin on the grenade I had been holding onto for 6 months. I was not going to survive this family anymore. I was going to manage them completely out of existence. Do you know the exact moment a victim stops crying and starts planning their hostile takeover? I stood perfectly still in the harsh, unflattering fluorescent light of the restaurant bathroom, my thumb hovering silently over the call button on my phone screen. The freezing wet red wine stain on my dress felt heavy against my skin, a physical, sticky reminder of my permanently designated place in this family's hierarchy. I took one long, incredibly deep breath, locking every single trace of emotion into a steel box deep inside my chest, and firmly pressed call. The phone rang exactly twice before a crisp, highly professional voice answered the line. "Sloan? It is quite late. Is everything all right?" It was Alaric. Alaric was the chief executive officer of Vanguard Medical Group, the massive, sprawling healthcare conglomerate that operated several of the largest private hospitals in the state. But more importantly, Alaric worked directly for me. My private equity firm, Apex Holdings, had aggressively acquired Vanguard Medical exactly 8 months ago when they were teetering dangerously on the edge of complete bankruptcy. I was the chairman of the board. I owned the very walls Delphine used to arrogantly walk through. "Everything is perfectly fine, Alaric," I said, my voice completely steady, stripped of any familial vulnerability or weakness. "I need you to immediately execute the liquidation protocol for the Parker account." There was a very brief, heavy pause on the other end of the line. The Parker account was the highly classified internal code name we used for the massive embezzlement file regarding Dr. Delphine Parker. When I first acquired the hospital and discovered my own sister's name plastered across the devastating audit reports, I had intervened. I used my ultimate authority to order Alaric to halt the criminal proceedings. I told him to arrange a quiet, private restitution plan. I had, in absolute secret, saved her from federal prison, foolishly hoping she would learn her lesson and change her ways. "Are you absolutely sure, Sloan?" Alaric asked, his tone instantly shifting into full, ruthless corporate mode. "If I execute this protocol tonight, we permanently retract the private settlement offer. We file the civil suit for the full $850,000 immediately in the morning, and we hand the entire mountain of evidence of fraud directly over to the state medical board for permanent license revocation. There is absolutely no going back from this once I sign the papers." I looked at my cold reflection in the mirror. I thought of the $5,000 a month stolen from my Goodwill. I thought of the fake cubic zirconia necklace shining brightly on Delphine's neck. I thought of the cold wine currently soaking my dress. "I am entirely sure," I replied, my voice hard as diamond. "I want the papers fully drawn up and legally notarized tonight." "And Alaric?" "Yes, Chairman." "Do not send them via courier or email. I need you to deliver them personally. Tomorrow evening. At the wedding reception." I gave him the exact address of the ultra-exclusive country club where the wedding was being held. "Sloan, that is highly unorthodox for a corporate filing," Alaric said, though I could clearly hear a trace of grim, understanding respect in his voice. "It is absolutely necessary," I corrected him sharply. Bring the financial audit files, the official termination papers, and the civil suit notice. Have them in a physical, heavy folder. I will text you the exact time to walk through those doors. Be ready. Understood, Chairman. It will be done. I ended the call. The board was fully set. The pieces were moving into place. I texted my senior legal assistant next, instructing her to immediately freeze the corporate accounts that managed the luxury property portfolio Delphine was currently living in. Yes, that was yet another secret in this web of lies. The massive, ultra-luxury downtown loft Delphine constantly bragged about renting from an exclusive, high-end management company. My firm owned the entire building. She had been living in my house, paying rent with the money my mother systematically stole from me. I put my phone back into my clutch, smoothed down my ruined, wine-stained dress, and walked calmly back into the dining room. My mother looked up with a sneer as I approached the table. She eyed the massive stain and sighed loudly, playing the victim. Well, you will just have to stand in the very back row in the photos tomorrow. Try to keep your arms crossed over your chest so you don't ruin the aesthetic. I smiled. A genuine, relaxed, chilling smile that seemed to momentarily unnerve her. Do not worry, Mom, I said smoothly, taking my seat and picking up my water glass. I promise you, tomorrow night, absolutely no one will be looking at my dress. The morning of the wedding arrived with a mocking, brilliant brightness. The sky was a crisp, clear, cloudless blue. I arrived at the bridal suite at the country club at exactly 8 in the morning, carrying my cheap beige bridesmaid dress in a plastic garment bag, ready to play my part one last time. The massive suite was a whirlwind of frantic chaos. Expensive hairdressers and elite makeup artists buzzed around the room, spraying aerosol hairspray and holding up lighted mirrors. Delphine was sitting directly in the center of the room, wearing a custom silk robe embroidered with the word bride in real gold thread. She was aggressively barking orders at our younger cousins, demanding more chilled champagne, and loudly complaining that the natural lighting was making her look tired. My mother was frantically pacing the floor, holding a clipboard, stressing intensely over the VIP seating chart. When she saw me walk in, she stopped and glared. Finally, she snapped. Sloan, go down to the main reception hall right now and make sure those useless florists did not mess up the centerpieces. Since you selfishly refused to make them yourself, we had to pay a literal fortune, and I do not trust them to get it right. I did not argue. I did not sigh. I just nodded, left the loud suite, and walked down the long, heavily carpeted hallway to the grand ballroom. The room was breathtakingly beautiful. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, towering arrangements of white roses covered every surface, and silver cutlery gleamed under the warm lights. It was a $1,000,000 illusion, paid for entirely by stolen money and a heavily mortgaged future. I found my designated place card at the VIP table near the front. Sloan Parker. Placed right next to Uncle Soren. They deliberately wanted me close enough to mock and humiliate, but far enough away from the groom's wealthy parents to avoid answering uncomfortable questions about my failures. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I sent a single, final text to Alaric. Target time, 7:45 p.m. Wait for my exact signal to enter. I stood alone in the center of the massive, empty ballroom, listening to the quiet, steady hum of the air conditioning. In less than 12 hours, this pristine room would become a brutal battlefield. My family thought they had confidently invited a weak, pathetic sheep to the slaughter. They had absolutely no idea they had just locked themselves in a cage with a wolf. I walked calmly back to the bridal suite, put on my beige dress, and let the makeup artist apply a thin, cheap layer of foundation to my face. I stood quietly in the background of every single photo, smiling a quiet, hollow smile as my mother fussed endlessly over Delphine's incredibly long train. "You look absolutely perfect, darling," my mother cooed, wiping a dramatic, fake tear from her eye. "The most successful, brilliant, beautiful bride in the world. Declan is an incredibly lucky man to have a surgeon for a wife." Delphine beamed brightly, her fingers gently touching the fake diamond necklace resting on her chest. "I know, Mom. I really earned all of this. I looked at them, standing there in their impenetrable bubble of delusion. I felt a fleeting, tiny moment of sadness, a brief mourning for the loving family I never had, the mother who never loved me, the sister who only ever saw me as a footstool to step on. But the sadness vanished as quickly as it came, instantly replaced by the cold, hard, undeniable reality of justice. Enjoy your shiny plastic crown, Delphine, I thought, watching her pose perfectly for the camera. Because tonight, I am burning your entire castle to the ground. Thank you for following the first part of the story. If you have ever endured injustice within your own family, please leave a comment sharing your experience. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next part, where the most shocking revelation unfolds. The reception was a masterclass in aggressive extravagance. As the heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom swung open to welcome the guests, a wave of warm, vanilla-scented air washed over us. The ceiling was a canopy of imported crystal, reflecting the flickering light of 1,000 tall, slender candles placed meticulously across 20 circular tables. A live jazz quartet played softly in the corner, their smooth melodies drowning out the frantic, desperate reality hidden just beneath the surface of this entire charade. I found my assigned seat at the long, rectangular VIP table situated at the very front of the room. The seating arrangement was a strategic maneuver designed by my mother, Orla. Declan, the wealthy groom, sat proudly in the center alongside Delphine. His parents, dripping in generational money and genuine jewels, flanked them. My mother sat radiating triumph next to Declan's father. I, on the other hand, was placed at the very end of the table, wedged firmly between Uncle Soren and Aunt Sybil, two people whose entire personalities revolved around echoing whatever cruel sentiment my mother put out into the world. Dinner commenced with a parade of waiters carrying silver trays. We were served seared scallops, truffled risotto, and vintage champagne that cost more per bottle than my mother's monthly mortgage payment. A mortgage she could no longer afford without my unknowing help. As the wine flowed freely, the conversation grew louder, and the masks began to slip. Declan was speaking animatedly to his new father-in-law, his voice carrying down the table. "I am just so incredibly proud of her," Declan beamed, gazing at Delphine with pure, unadulterated adoration. "The hours she puts in at Vanguard Medical, the lives she saves every single day in the operating room. She is a literal superhero. I do not know how she manages the stress of being a top-tier surgeon and still finds the time to plan a wedding like this." Delphine smiled modestly, placing a manicured hand over her chest, right directly above the fake cubic zirconia heirloom necklace shining brightly under the chandeliers. "Oh, Declan, you flatter me too much," she murmured, her voice dripping with practiced humility. "My work is my calling. It is never truly a burden when you are doing what you love and giving back to the community." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my ice water. The sheer audacity of her performance was almost hypnotic. She was accepting praise for a job she had been violently fired from 6 months ago. She was playing the selfless savior while a federal investigation for embezzling nearly $1 million hovered over her head like a guillotine. Uncle Soren, thoroughly emboldened by his third glass of expensive wine, turned his heavy gaze toward me. He leaned over, invading my personal space, his breath reeking of garlic and fermented grapes. "So, Sloane," Soren boomed, ensuring his voice was loud enough for the groom's extended family to hear. "Have you managed to lock down a real job yet? Or are you still doing those little freelance craft projects from your tiny apartment? You know, Delphine's new hospital connections could probably get you a solid position in the cafeteria if you just ask her nicely." Aunt Sybil giggled behind her napkin. My mother shot Soren a warning look, not because she disagreed with him, but because she wanted to maintain the illusion of a perfect, supportive family in front of Declan's parents. I carefully set my crystal water glass down on the crisp white linen tablecloth. I did not shrink back. I did not look away. I turned to Uncle Soren and offered him a slow, razor-sharp smile that did not reach my eyes. "I appreciate your concern, Uncle Soren," I said, my voice smooth, loud, and perfectly steady. "But my projects are keeping me quite busy these days. In fact, I spend a lot of my time dealing with corporate restructuring and asset liquidation. It is fascinating work. You learn so much about how easily people can ruin their own lives when they get greedy. Soren blinked, his alcohol-addled brain struggling to process the corporate terminology. Liquid what? What does that even mean, Sloan? Are you selling blenders? I am managing failing assets, I clarified gently, my eyes darting for a fraction of a second toward Delphine. I step in when people mismanage millions of dollars and try to hide their fraud. I clean up their catastrophic messes. Delphine's hand froze midair. For the briefest of moments, the serene, confident mask slipped, and a flash of genuine, unbridled panic crossed her eyes. She stared at me, her knuckles turning white around the stem of her wine glass. She knew exactly what I was saying. She just did not know how I knew. Orla quickly intervened, sensing the sudden, icy shift in the atmosphere. Oh, Sloan always tries to make her little data entry jobs sound like Wall Street. She laughed nervously, waving a dismissive hand in my direction. Let us focus on the bride and groom, shall we? This is a night for celebrating real success. The table eagerly murmured in agreement, quickly moving on from the uncomfortable outcast at the end of the table. Soren smirked, satisfied that he had done his duty in putting me back in my place. Delphine exhaled a shaky breath, clearly convincing herself that my words were just a lucky, coincidental guess from a bitter younger sister. I picked up my fork and silently continued eating my dinner. The clock was ticking. The foundation of their glittering, false world was already cracking under the immense pressure of their own deceit. They were entirely oblivious to the fact that I held the detonator in the palm of my hand. I watched Declan kiss his bride's cheek, utterly blind to the impending ruin. I felt a profound sense of pity for him, but I could not stop the avalanche that was about to hit. What happens to a room full of arrogant, mocking people when the punchline of their favorite joke suddenly buys the entire stage? The dinner plates were cleared away by silent staff, replaced by towering tiers of vanilla bean wedding cake and silver carafes of rich, dark espresso. The jazz band slowed their tempo, signaling the traditional time for the evening toasts. The gentle hum of polite conversation filled the massive room. My mother, Orla, adjusted her expensive silk shawl and stood up from her seat at the head of the VIP table. She picked up a heavy silver spoon and firmly tapped it against the side of her crystal champagne flute. Clink, clink, clink. The sharp, demanding sound cut through the ambient noise like a blade. The band stopped playing. 200 guests turned their heads, their conversations dying away until a heavy, expectant silence settled over the grand ballroom. Orla beamed, thriving in the spotlight, absorbing the attention of the wealthy crowd like a sponge. Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate this magnificent union, my mother began, her voice projecting beautifully across the room. She spoke of love, of family, of the incredible journey Delphine and Declan were embarking upon. It was a practiced, polished speech, entirely devoid of genuine warmth, but packed with impressive buzzwords. Then, she turned her gaze toward Delphine. Her eyes shone with a sickeningly intense pride. Raising children is the greatest challenge of a mother's life, Orla continued, pausing for dramatic effect. You pour your heart and soul into them, hoping they find their way. And looking at this table tonight, I am overwhelmed with emotion. She turned her head slightly, her gaze drifting past Delphine, sliding past Declan, until her eyes locked directly onto me sitting at the far end of the table. A cruel, familiar smirk played at the corner of her heavily painted lips. As a mother, you watch your children take different paths, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness that thinly veiled her venom. One daughter becomes a brilliant surgeon, a woman who literally saves lives, a shining beacon of success and ambition. She paused. The room waited. And the other, she sighed, shaking her head with a theatrical display of pity. The other can barely keep a job. For a fraction of a second, the room was entirely silent. Then the laughter started. It began with Uncle Soren's boisterous chuckle and quickly rippled down the length of the VIP table. Declan's extended family laughed politely, assuming it was an established, endearing family joke. My mother laughed the hardest, a bright, musical sound that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. She had done it. She had successfully humiliated me in front of hundreds of people, securing Delphine's status as the sole victor of the family. I did not move. I let the cruel laughter wash over me. I felt the cold, heavy stares of strangers pitying the pathetic sister in the cheap dress. When the laughter began to subside, Orla raised her glass high into the air, turning back to Delphine. So, let us raise a glass to my incredible, perfect daughter. To Delphine, the most successful. I let go of my heavy silver fork. It dropped from my hand and hit the pristine porcelain plate with a loud, violent crack. The sound was sharp as a gunshot, echoing loudly in the sudden quiet of the room. My mother stopped mid-sentence. Her hand, holding the champagne flute, froze in the air. Every eye at the VIP table snapped toward me. I slowly stood up. I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs scraping harshly against the polished marble floor. I did not yell. I did not cry. I looked directly into my mother's bewildered eyes, my voice calm, steady, and carrying the icy weight of an executioner. If Delphine is such a brilliant, successful surgeon, I asked, the words ringing out clearly across the silent ballroom, then why did you have to remortgage your house to pay off her $850,000 debt? The silence that followed was not just quiet. It was a suffocating, physical vacuum. The air was entirely sucked out of the room. Declan's father lowered his wine glass slowly, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. Uncle Soren's jaw dropped open. Aunt Sybil stopped breathing. My mother's face instantly drained of all color, shifting from a triumphant pink to a sickly, horrifying shade of paper white. Her hand began to tremble violently, spilling expensive champagne onto the white tablecloth. What are you talking about, Sloane? She stammered, her voice a fragile, terrified whisper. Have you lost your mind? Stop this right now. You are ruining your sister's wedding. I turned my gaze to Delphine. She looked as though she had been struck by lightning. Her eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated terror. She opened her mouth to speak, to deny it, to call me insane, but no words came out. I am talking about the embezzlement, Delphine, I said smoothly, refusing to break eye contact. I am talking about the internal audit at Vanguard Medical 6 months ago. The fake vendor contracts. The stolen money. I am talking about the fact that you were stripped of your medical license and fired in disgrace to avoid federal prison. Declan stood up abruptly, knocking his chair over. Delphine? He asked, his voice cracking. What is she saying? Tell her to shut up. Tell me she is lying. Delphine reached out for him, her hands shaking violently. Declan, please, she is crazy. Sloane has always been jealous of me. She is making this up to ruin my life. Mom, do something. Orla stepped forward, her eyes wild with panic. Security, she shrieked, her composed facade entirely shattered. Someone get her out of here. She is deeply unwell. I did not flinch. I just stood there, a pillar of calm amidst the explosion I had just detonated. I checked my silver watch. It was exactly 7:45. You do not need security, Mom, I said quietly, looking toward the back of the room. You just need to answer the door. As if summoned by magic, the heavy, intricately carved oak doors at the grand entrance of the ballroom violently swung open. Are you ready to meet the man who holds the keys to the Golden Child's prison cell? The heavy oak doors hit the wall with a resounding thud that echoed through the silent, paralyzed ballroom. Every head in the room, hundreds of confused guests, instantly snapped toward the entrance. A man stepped into the warm light of the chandeliers. He was tall, imposing, and dressed in a meticulously tailored charcoal suit that screamed corporate authority. His silver hair was perfectly swept back, and his expression was entirely unreadable, carved from cold stone. He held a thick, heavy black leather briefcase in his right hand. It was Alaric, the chief executive officer of Vanguard Medical Group. He did not walk like a wedding guest looking for an open bar. He walked with the heavy, measured strides of an executioner marching toward the gallows. The crowd naturally parted for him, sensing the sheer, undeniable weight of his presence. He walked straight down the center aisle, his cold eyes locked entirely on the VIP table. My mother, Orla, recognized him instantly. Despite her sheer panic, her deeply ingrained instinct to grovel to authority and wealth immediately took over. She desperately tried to salvage the burning wreckage of her reality. She stepped forward, smoothing her dress with trembling hands, forcing a wide, frantic, incredibly fake smile onto her pale face. "Mr. Alaric." Orla gasped, her voice shrill and desperate. "What a wonderful, unexpected surprise. We are so honored you came. I know Delphine was hoping someone from the hospital board would make it to celebrate their star surgeon. Please, come sit down, let me get you a drink." Alaric did not slow down. He did not smile. He walked right past my mother as if she were a piece of discarded furniture. He walked right past Delphine, who was visibly hyperventilating, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly her fingernails were digging into the wood. Alaric stopped directly in front of me. He stood at the far end of the table, looking at the woman in the cheap beige dress with the permanent red wine stain on the front. Then, in front of 200 stunned guests, the CEO of the most powerful medical conglomerate in the state bowed his head deeply in a gesture of absolute, undeniable respect. "Good evening, Chairman," Alaric said, his deep, resonant voice carrying clearly in the dead silence of the room. "I brought the liquidation files and the civil suit documents exactly as you requested." The entire VIP table froze. Declan's wealthy parents exchanged horrified, bewildered glances. Uncle Soren rubbed his eyes as if he were hallucinating. My mother let out a strangled, breathless noise. "Chairman?" she whispered, staring at me as if I had just grown a second head. "What is he talking about, Sloane? Why is he calling you chairman?" Alaric turned his head slowly, looking at my mother with an expression of profound, chilling disgust. "He is calling her chairman, Mrs. Parker, because Sloane is the sole owner and presiding chairman of Apex Holdings," Alaric stated clearly, ensuring his words echoed off the walls. "The private equity firm that aggressively acquired Vanguard Medical Group 8 months ago. She is my boss. She owns the hospital your daughter used to work for." Orla stumbled backward, hitting the edge of a chair. "No," she gasped, shaking her head violently. "No, that is impossible. Sloane is a freelancer. She does odd jobs. She cannot even afford a new car." Alaric ignored her entirely. He unlatched his heavy leather briefcase. The metallic click sounded incredibly loud. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, bound in red tape, and dropped them onto the pristine white tablecloth directly in front of Delphine and Declan. "I am not here as a wedding guest," Alaric announced coldly. "I am here to formally serve Dr. Delphine Parker with a massive civil lawsuit for the theft of $850,000 from Vanguard Medical. Furthermore, I am here to serve notice that all private restitution agreements have been permanently revoked by the chairman. The medical board has been notified of the fraud. Criminal charges will be filed by the state prosecutor on Monday morning." Delphine let out a gut-wrenching sob. She collapsed into her chair, covering her face with her hands, her perfect makeup ruined by a sudden flood of terrified tears. "It is not true," she wept into her palms. "Declan, please, it is a misunderstanding." Declan did not look at her. He was staring at the thick folder on the table, reading the bold, black letters detailing the embezzlement, the forged vendor signatures, the shell companies. My mother, desperate and entirely broken, turned to Alaric. "But the hospital agreed to a payment plan," she cried out, tears streaming down her face. "We paid the first installment. I took a second mortgage on my home. You cannot do this. Delphine is a brilliant doctor. She made a small mistake." Alaric looked at my mother, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. "A small mistake? Your daughter orchestrated a highly complex, systematic fraud for years. And do you know why she is not already sitting in a federal prison cell wearing an orange jumpsuit?" Orla stared at him, trembling uncontrollably. "Do you know who truly built her safety net?" Alaric asked, his voice dripping with venom. "It was not you. It was the woman you just publicly humiliated. Chairman Sloane personally intervened 6 months ago. She quietly used her ultimate authority to halt the criminal proceedings. She ordered me to offer a private restitution plan to save your family from public disgrace. She is the only reason your daughter was allowed to walk free. The room spun. My mother looked at me, her eyes wide with a horrifying, crushing realization. The daughter she had mocked, belittled, and treated like a worthless parasite was the secret architect of their entire survival. And now Alaric finished, stepping back from the table. Because of your actions tonight, the chairman has rightfully withdrawn her protection. I stood in silence, looking down at my family. The illusion was gone. The golden child was a confirmed criminal facing prison time. The enabling mother was deeply in debt and facing the loss of her home. The grand $1 million wedding was nothing more than a crime scene. Declan slowly reached out, his hand shaking, and picked up the thick red folder containing the absolute truth about the woman he was about to marry. What happens when a man realizes his beautiful bride is nothing but a desperate, lying thief? Declan's hands trembled violently as he flipped open the heavy red folder. The ambient noise in the ballroom had completely vanished, replaced by the sickening sound of rustling paper and Delphine's frantic, desperate sobbing. Declan's eyes darted rapidly across the pages, absorbing the staggering numbers, the forged signatures, the detailed evidence of his beautiful bride's elaborate corporate theft. With every sentence he read, the color drained further from his face. He looked like a man who had just discovered he was standing on a live landmine. "Declan, please," Delphine choked out, reaching a shaking hand across the table to touch his arm. "I can explain everything. It was a mistake. A massive misunderstanding. The hospital administration was out to get me." Declan violently jerked his arm away as if her touch burned his skin. He dropped the heavy folder back onto the table. He did not yell. He did not cause a chaotic scene. He simply looked at Delphine with an expression of profound, chilling disgust. "You lied to me," he whispered, his voice cracking with betrayal. "You lied to my family. You told me you took a sabbatical to plan our future. You were fired for stealing nearly $1 million. You are a criminal. I was going to pay it back." Delphine pleaded, tears streaking her expensive foundation. "Once we were married, once I had access to the trust fund, I was going to fix it. I did it for us, Declan." Declan's father stepped forward, his face purple with rage. "You plan to use our family's money to pay off your felony theft?" he roared, his booming voice shattering the remaining silence. "The wedding is over." Declan slowly reached for his left hand. He twisted the heavy gold wedding band he had placed on his finger just hours ago, pulled it off, and dropped it onto the white tablecloth. It landed next to the fraud documents with a dull, hollow clink. "Do not ever contact me again," Declan said softly. He turned on his heel and walked rapidly toward the exit. His parents immediately followed, casting looks of pure, unadulterated revulsion at my mother and sister. The groom's entire side of the room began to stand up in a chaotic wave, grabbing their coats and rushing for the doors, eager to escape the toxic fallout. Delphine let out a guttural scream, a horrific sound of pure, selfish despair. She slumped over the table, her beautiful custom silk gown bunching up around her as she wept hysterically into her arms. My mother, Orla, was hyperventilating. She gripped the back of an empty chair, her knuckles white, her chest heaving. She looked at the ruined wedding, the fleeing guests, the sobbing golden child, and finally, she looked at me. "Sloane," Orla gasped, her voice desperate and pleading. "How could you do this? How could you destroy your own sister on the most important night of her life? We are your family." I calmly walked around the edge of the table, my cheap shoes clicking softly against the marble floor, until I was standing directly next to Delphine's shaking form. I looked down at her. "Sit up, Delphine," I commanded, my voice stripping away any remaining warmth. She slowly raised her head, her face a ruined, swollen mess of tears and mascara. "Take off the necklace," I said coldly. Delphine's hands instinctively flew to her chest, covering the dazzling diamond heirloom. "What? Why?" she choked out. "It is mine. Mom gave it to me." "Take it off, Delphine," I repeated, my tone leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. Because if you do not unhook it right now, I will personally rip it off your neck, and I guarantee you will not like how that feels. Trembling uncontrollably, Delphine reached behind her neck, fumbled with the tiny clasp, and let the heavy necklace fall into her hands. She held it out to me. I snatched it from her grasp. I held it up to the light of the crystal chandeliers. It sparkled brilliantly. It is a beautiful piece of glass, I announced loudly, ensuring my mother heard every single word. Glass? Orla whispered, confusion temporarily cutting through her panic. Sloane, what are you talking about? That is your great-grandmother's diamond heirloom. It has been in our family for decades. It was, I corrected her. Until your precious, brilliant, flawless surgeon daughter secretly pawned it 2 years ago to pay off a hidden credit card debt. She replaced it with a cubic zirconia fake, so you would never find out. Orla gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically shot. No, Delphine would never. She did, I stated firmly. The pawnbroker called me. I quietly paid $12,000 in cash to buy the real necklace back. The real heirloom is currently sitting in a heavy steel safe in my penthouse. You are wearing cheap costume jewelry, Delphine, which is incredibly fitting, considering your entire life is an embarrassing, cheap fake. Delphine buried her face in her hands again, sobbing louder. She did not even attempt to deny it. The truth was too heavy, too overwhelming to fight against anymore. Orla stared at the glittering glass in my hand, the final, crushing blow to her grand illusion. Her golden child was a thief, a liar, and a fraud. The perfect narrative she had fiercely protected for 30 years had just violently exploded in her face. She looked at me, her eyes wide, realizing for the very first time just how much power I truly held. Do you know what happens when you cut off the oxygen to a raging fire? I dropped the fake cubic zirconia necklace onto the table next to Declan's discarded wedding ring. It hit the wood with a dull, pathetic sound, a perfect physical representation of the lies this family had built their identity upon. My mother, Orla, took a shaky, tentative step toward me. The arrogance that had fueled her entire life was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, groveling terror. Sloane, please, she begged, tears spilling over her eyelashes. I did not know. I swear to you, I did not know about the necklace. I only took out the second mortgage because she was going to go to jail. You have to help us. You own the hospital. You can make this entire lawsuit go away. You have the money. Please, Sloane, you have to save your sister. I looked at the woman who had birthed me. I searched my heart, digging deep into my chest, looking for even a tiny shred of sympathy, a lingering thread of a daughter's love. I found absolutely nothing. The well was dry. She had burned it out of me over decades of cruelty. Save her? I asked, my voice dangerously soft. The way you saved me when you threw my graduation diploma in the trash? The way you supported me when you called my first business a depressing basement hobby? The way you poured wine on me yesterday to get a cheap laugh from strangers? Orla flinched, shrinking back as if I had physically struck her. That was different, she stammered defensively. I was just pushing you to be better. I wanted you to succeed like Delphine. You wanted a punching bag, I corrected her, my tone turning to cold, hard steel. You wanted someone to look down on so you could feel superior about the monster you created. I took a step closer to her, forcing her to look me directly in the eyes. And speaking of money, Mom, let us talk about the $5,000 you receive on the second day of every single month. Orla's breath caught sharply in her throat. Her eyes darted away, unable to hold my gaze. I know about the transfers, I stated, the words falling like heavy anvils in the quiet room. I know that for 3 years, you took the money I worked relentlessly to earn, the money I quietly sent to ensure you had a comfortable retirement, and you handed it directly to Delphine to fund her luxury cars and designer clothes. And when she got caught stealing from my hospital, you used my money to pay the interest on the mortgage you took out to save her from prison. Orla covered her mouth, a stifled sob escaping her throat. Sloane, I had no choice, she wept. She is your sister. She was drowning. She was drowning because she is a greedy, entitled thief, I replied, showing zero mercy. And you enabled her. You stole from the daughter you publicly called a loser to fund the criminal lifestyle of the daughter you worshipped. I paused, letting the crushing reality of her actions settle deeply over her. I called my wealth manager this afternoon, I announced calmly. The monthly transfers are permanently canceled. I am cutting you off, Mom. Entirely. I will not pay another dime toward your mortgage, and I will certainly not fund Delphine's legal defense. You chose to mortgage your house to save a criminal. Now you get to face the bank when you default. Orla fell to her knees right there on the marble floor of the grand ballroom, surrounded by the debris of the ruined wedding. She grabbed the hem of my ruined, wine-stained dress. No, she screamed, her voice cracking with raw hysteria. You cannot do this. I will lose the house. I will be homeless. Delphine will go to federal prison. You are a monster, Sloane. You are a cold-blooded monster. I gently but firmly pulled the fabric of my dress from her desperate grasp. I stepped back, looking down at her weeping form and Delphine's broken, sobbing silhouette at the table. I am not a monster, Mom, I said quietly, the finality ringing clear in my voice. I am just a mirror. I am simply reflecting your own vicious, toxic choices right back at you. You always desperately wanted a daughter to be proud of. You always had one. You just chose the wrong one to love. I turned away from the wreckage of my family. I walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, my head held high. Alaric fell into step smoothly beside me, his briefcase firmly in hand. We walked past the towering floral centerpieces, past the untouched wedding cake, and out through the heavy oak doors, leaving the wailing, shattered ruins of their empire behind us in the dark. For the first time in 35 years, I took a breath of air that felt entirely, profoundly clean. But there was still one final piece of the board left to move. Where do you go when the battle is finally won? 3 days later, I was sitting on the wide, sprawling terrace of my luxury penthouse, holding a warm mug of imported green tea. The morning air was incredibly crisp, and the sprawling city skyline stretched out before me, gleaming brightly in the early sunlight. My apartment was deeply quiet. No screaming, no drama, no toxic manipulation. Just the peaceful, steady hum of the wind sweeping across the glass balcony. My phone vibrated violently against the glass coffee table. I picked it up. The screen was flooded with notifications. Since the catastrophic wedding night, my family had rapidly descended into sheer, unadulterated madness. Uncle Soren had desperately tried to call me 12 times, leaving increasingly unhinged voicemails demanding I fix the situation and restore the family's honor. Aunt Sybil sent a long, rambling text accusing me of being a jealous sociopath who planned this intricate revenge for years. The flying monkeys were furiously circling, desperately trying to protect the deeply flawed system they had relied on for decades. I blocked every single one of their numbers without a second thought. Then, a text message arrived from Delphine. It was the very first time she had reached out since Declan walked out the doors of the ballroom. Sloane, please. I am begging you. The management company served me with a 30-day eviction notice this morning. They said the building owner demanded my immediate removal due to the pending felony charges. I have no money. Declan's family is suing me for the wedding costs. Mom is facing foreclosure. We have absolutely nothing. Please, you have to talk to your property managers. Do not put me on the street. I stared at the glowing text message, taking a slow sip of my warm tea. The management company had indeed served her. What Delphine still did not fully realize, and what I had absolutely no intention of ever explaining to her, was that Apex Holdings, my firm, owned the massive luxury loft building she lived in. She was not just evicted by an anonymous corporate landlord. She was officially, legally evicted by the sister she had mocked relentlessly. I did not reply to her message. I simply deleted it, swiping the notification away into the digital void, and set my phone face down on the table. Whatever brutal legal and financial consequences Delphine faced from the state prosecutor and the hospital board belonged entirely to her. Whatever terrible fate awaited my mother's mortgaged house belonged entirely to her. I had spent my entire life trying to secretly protect them from their own toxic flaws, sacrificing my own peace of mind to fund their grand illusions. I was finally, truly done. I leaned back against the plush cushions of my outdoor sofa, listening to the distant sounds of the city below. For years, I had secretly believed that true peace would only come when my mother finally looked at me and admitted that I was enough. I had foolishly waited for an apology that was never going to come. I had been profoundly wrong. Peace did not come when my family changed. Peace arrived the exact second I stopped needing them to validate my existence. I did not win this brutal war because Delphine fell from her pedestal. I won because I finally stopped allowing my mother to aggressively use my quiet life as evidence that someone else was better. Sometimes, family love gets dangerously tangled up with intense control, bitter comparison, and suffocating shame. Setting a firm, absolute boundary does not make you cruel, even if it feels incredibly harsh in the moment. Sometimes, walking away and letting them face the devastating consequences of their own actions is the very first honest, healthy thing you have ever done for yourself. I looked down at my hands. I was no longer holding onto the heavy, crushing weight of their expectations. I was just Sloane, a deeply successful, fiercely independent woman who survived the fire and built an empire from the ashes. They thought they had successfully buried me beneath their lies and their mockery. But they did not realize they had planted a seed. And seeds, given enough time in the dark, eventually grow strong enough to shatter concrete. They call me cold-blooded for ruining my sister's big day and leaving the family destitute. But I have to wonder, is constantly covering up corruption, theft, and lies really an act of kindness? What do you think? Did I cross the line by exposing everything in front of hundreds of people, or was I simply handing them the bitter truth they fully deserved? Thank you for following the story to the end. If you've ever struggled to be yourself within a toxic family or had to make a tough decision to protect yourself, please leave a comment and share your thoughts. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to support the channel and stay tuned for more dramatic stories.